Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! Emily's heart raced as she approached the stern-faced agent, her palms clammy against the smooth plastic of her driver's license. She'd rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. "Next!" the agent called, his voice gruff and impatient. Emily stepped forward, forcing a smile as she handed over her ID and boarding pass. The agent's eyes flicked between the documents and her face, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing second.
"Is this really your ID?"
he asked, holding up the license with Ethan, printed in bold letters. Emily's throat tightened, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "Yes, it is. I'm transgender and haven't had the opportunity to update my legal documents yet." The agent's eyebrows shot up, his gaze now openly scrutinizing Emily's appearance.
"Why are you dressed as a woman?"
The question hung in the air, sharp and invasive. Emily felt her cheeks burn as nearby passengers turned to stare, their curiosity piqued by the exchange. "Because I am a woman," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is who I am." The agent leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Do you have any other forms of identification?" Emily's hands trembled as she fumbled through her purse, acutely aware of the growing line behind her. "I have my credit card and my work ID, but they both have my legal name on them." As she handed over the additional items, Emily caught sight of a young woman watching the interaction with a mix of sympathy and discomfort. Their eyes met briefly, and the woman offered a small, encouraging smile. The agent examined the new IDs, his frown deepening. "These don't match your appearance either. How do I know you're not trying to impersonate someone else?" Emily's heart sank. She'd anticipated some difficulty, but this level of scrutiny was beyond what she'd imagined. "I understand your concern, but I assure you, I'm not trying to deceive anyone. I'm simply trying to travel as myself." The agent's eyes narrowed.
"Wait here,"
he instructed, before stepping away to consult with a colleague. Emily stood rooted to the spot, feeling exposed and vulnerable. She could hear the murmurs of impatient travelers behind her, their frustration palpable. A bead of sweat trickled down her back, and she resisted the urge to wipe her damp palms on her carefully chosen outfit, a modest blouse and skirt that she'd hoped would help her blend in. After what felt like an eternity, the agent returned with a supervisor in tow. The supervisor, a middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her hair, addressed Emily directly. "Ma'am, I understand there's a discrepancy with your identification. Can you explain the situation?" Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself to recount her story yet again. "I'm a transgender woman. I've been living as Emily for the past 6 months, but I haven't had the chance to legally change my name or update my ID yet. I know it's confusing, but I promise you, I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I'm just trying to get to Chicago for a job interview." The supervisor listened intently, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she nodded. "I see. Thank you for explaining. We'll need to conduct additional screening to verify your identity. Please follow me." Emily's stomach churned as she was led to a separate area, away from the main flow of travelers. She could feel curious eyes following her, and she hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself as small as possible. In the private screening area, Emily was asked to empty her carry-on bag and submit to a pat-down. As a female officer carefully ran her hands along Emily's arms and legs, Emily closed her eyes, willing herself not to cry. She thought of all the times she'd dreamed of living authentically, of the joy she'd felt when she finally embraced her true self. Now, that decision felt like a burden, a scarlet letter marking her as different. Suspicious. "Is this really necessary?" Emily asked quietly as the officer checked the waistband of her skirt. The female officer paused, meeting Emily's gaze with a mix of empathy and professionalism. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but we have to follow protocol. We're almost done." As the screening concluded, Emily was allowed to repack her bag. Her hands shook as she carefully folded her clothes, hyper-aware of the officers watching her every move. She'd packed so carefully for this trip, choosing outfits that made her feel confident and feminine without drawing too much attention. Now, those same clothes felt like evidence of her deception. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the supervisor approached Emily with her documents in hand. "Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Emily. You're cleared to proceed to your gate. Have a safe flight." Emily mumbled a thank you, gathering her belongings with trembling hands. As she walked away from the checkpoint, she could still feel eyes on her, judging, questioning. The relief of being allowed to continue her journey was overshadowed by the humiliation of the experience. She made her way to a nearby restroom, desperate for a moment of privacy. Inside a stall, Emily finally allowed herself to break down, silent tears streaming down her face. She'd known that transitioning would come with challenges, but the reality of it was overwhelming. Every day felt like a battle, a constant need to justify her existence to a world that wasn't quite ready to accept her. After a few minutes, Emily wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. She couldn't let this setback derail her. She had a flight to catch and a future to pursue. Stepping out of the stall, she approached the mirror, studying her reflection. The face that looked back at her was tear-stained, but determined. She touched up her makeup, erasing the visible signs of her distress. As she applied a fresh coat of lipstick, Emily made a silent vow to herself. She would not let this experience define her. She would continue to live her truth, no matter the obstacles. With renewed resolve, Emily exited the restroom and made her way toward her gate. The airport bustled around her, a sea of travelers, each on their own journey. As she walked, she caught sight of the young woman who had smiled at her earlier. The woman nodded in recognition, a small gesture of solidarity that warmed Emily's heart. Finding a seat near her gate, Emily pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. She debated whether to share her experience on social media, to add her voice to the chorus of trans individuals fighting for recognition and respect, but the thought of reliving the humiliation, of inviting more scrutiny and potential backlash, made her hesitate. Instead, she opened her email, composing a message to her best friend back home. "Made it through security. It was rough, but I'm okay. Wish me luck for the interview." She hit send, then leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of stillness amidst the airport chaos. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But as she watched families reunite and couples embrace, Emily reminded herself that she, too, deserved a place in this world, a place where she could exist freely without explanation or apology. An announcement crackled over the loudspeaker, calling for priority boarding for her flight. Emily gathered her things, taking a deep breath as she prepared to face whatever came next. "One step at a time," she told herself. That's how she'd gotten this far, and that's how she'd continue. As she joined the line of passengers, Emily caught her reflection in a nearby window. The woman looking back at her was stronger than she realized, braver than she gave herself credit for. With a small smile, Emily straightened her shoulders and moved forward. Chicago awaited, and with it, the promise of a new chapter in her journey. The flight to Chicago stretched before Emily like an endless expanse of uncertainty. As she settled into her window seat, she couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and apprehension. The relief came from finally being past the security checkpoint ordeal, but the apprehension stemmed from the knowledge that this was just one of many hurdles she would face in her journey. A middle-aged man took the seat next to her, offering a polite nod before burying his nose in a newspaper. Emily was grateful for the lack of interaction, still raw from her earlier experience. She gazed out the window as the plane taxied down the runway, watching the sprawling city of Los Angeles grow smaller beneath her. As the aircraft lifted off, Emily felt a symbolic weight lift from her shoulders. For a few hours at least, she could exist in this liminal space, free from the judgmental gazes and probing questions that had become an unwelcome part of her daily life. She reached into her bag, pulling out a well-worn notebook. Its pages were filled with thoughts, fears, and dreams, a chronicle of her transition journey. Emily flipped to a blank page and began to write, her pen moving swiftly across the paper as she poured out her feelings about the security checkpoint incident. The words flowed easily, a cathartic release of the emotions she'd been holding back. As she wrote, Emily reflected on the long road that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the years spent living as Ethan, feeling trapped in a body and identity that never quite fit. She remembered the fear and exhilaration of her first time presenting as Emily in public, the way her heart had raced as she stepped out of her apartment, terrified of being clocked, but desperate to finally be seen as her true self. Emily's pen paused as she recalled the reactions of her friends and family when she came out. Some had been immediately supportive, embracing her with open arms and eager to use her new name and pronouns. Others had struggled, their confusion and discomfort evident in awkward silences and averted gazes. And then there were those who had walked away entirely, unable or unwilling to accept her truth. A sudden bout of turbulence jolted Emily from her reverie. She glanced at her seatmate, who had dozed off, his newspaper crumpled in his lap. Emily envied his ability to sleep so peacefully, untroubled by the constant vigilance that had become second nature to her. As the plane steadied, Emily returned to her writing. She detailed her preparations for this trip, the careful selection of clothing, the hours spent practicing her makeup to achieve a natural look, the rehearsals of how to handle potential confrontations. It all seemed so exhausting when laid out on paper, a testament to the extra effort required simply to exist as herself in a world that wasn't always kind to those who defied expectations. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing that they were halfway to Chicago. Emily closed her notebook, tucking it safely back into her bag. She leaned her head against the cool window, watching the patchwork of fields and cities pass beneath her. In her reflection, Emily saw glimpses of both her past and her future. The sharp angle of her jaw, a remnant of testosterone's influence, contrasted with the soft curve of her cheeks, enhanced by months of hormone therapy. Her eyes, once guarded and wary, now held a spark of hope and determination. Emily's thoughts drifted to the job interview awaiting her in Chicago. It was a chance at a fresh start, an opportunity to build a career as her authentic self. She had agonized over whether to disclose her trans status during the application process, ultimately deciding to wait until the in-person interview. Now, as she neared her destination, doubt crept in. Would they see her for her skills and qualifications, or would her identity overshadow everything else? A gentle tap on her shoulder startled Emily from her thoughts. The flight attendant stood in the aisle, a kind smile on her face.
Would you like something to drink, miss?
The simple act of being addressed correctly, without hesitation or scrutiny, brought a lump to Emily's throat. She managed a smile, grateful for this small moment of affirmation. Just water, please. Thank you. As the flight attendant moved on, Emily sipped her water, reflecting on the power of these everyday interactions. Each time someone gendered her correctly, used her chosen name, or simply treated her with the same respect afforded to any other woman, it felt like a tiny victory. These moments, as fleeting as they were, helped balance out the weight of the more difficult encounters. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their descent into Chicago. Emily felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach, a mix of excitement and anxiety about what awaited her on the ground. As the plane banked, revealing the glittering expanse of Lake Michigan, Emily made a silent promise to herself. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage and determination that had brought her this far. As the wheels touched down on the runway at O'Hare International Airport, Emily took a deep breath. She was ready to step into the next chapter of her life, one where she could fully embrace her identity and pursue her dreams without apology. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began the familiar rush to retrieve their belongings and exit the plane. Emily waited patiently, allowing others to go ahead of her. As she stood to collect her bag from the overhead compartment, she caught the eye of a young girl a few rows back. The child was watching her with open curiosity, and for a moment, Emily tensed, bracing herself for an awkward question or comment. Instead, the girl smiled shyly and waved. Emily's heart warmed as she returned the gesture, reminded that sometimes acceptance could come from the most unexpected places. Stepping off the plane into the bustling terminal, Emily felt a surge of determination. Chicago stretched out before her, a city of possibilities. She straightened her shoulders and moved forward, ready to face whatever came next. The journey wouldn't be easy, but with each step, she was closer to living life on her own terms. As Emily made her way through the crowded terminal, she couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between her arrival in Chicago and her departure from Los Angeles. Here, she was just another face in the sea of travelers, anonymous and unremarkable. The relief was palpable, a welcome respite from the scrutiny she'd faced earlier. She followed the signs to baggage claim, her rolling carry-on clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. The familiar anxiety began to creep in as she approached the carousel, wondering if she'd face any issues claiming her checked bag. She'd carefully packed her medication in her carry-on, not willing to risk it getting lost, but her suitcase contained other essentials she couldn't afford to be without. As she waited for her bag to appear, Emily overheard a heated conversation nearby. A young man was arguing with an airline representative, his voice rising in frustration. "What do you mean you can't find my luggage? I have an important meeting tomorrow, and everything I need is in that bag!" Emily winced in sympathy, all too familiar with the feeling of being unprepared and vulnerable. She watched as the airline employee tried to calm the irate passenger, promising to do everything possible to locate the missing suitcase. The incident served as a stark reminder of how many aspects of her life now required careful planning and contingencies. Even something as simple as packing for a trip became a strategic operation, with backup plans for every possible scenario. Relief washed over Emily as she spotted her suitcase rounding the carousel. She stepped forward to retrieve it, accidentally bumping into another traveler in her haste. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Emily exclaimed, steadying herself. The woman she'd bumped into, a stylishly dressed professional in her 40s, waved off the apology with a smile. "No worries, honey. We're all in a rush to get out of here, aren't we?" The casual, friendly interaction caught Emily off guard. For a moment, she was just another woman, sharing a common experience with a fellow traveler. It was a small thing, but it filled her with a sense of belonging she often struggled to feel. As Emily made her way towards the exit, she passed a row of restrooms. The familiar dilemma presented itself. Which one to use? Despite living as Emily for months now, this simple choice still caused her anxiety. She'd had negative experiences in both men's and women's restrooms, each fraught with its own risks and discomforts. Today, however, Emily was determined not to let fear dictate her actions. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door to the women's restroom, reminding herself that she had every right to be there. Inside, she was relieved to find it relatively empty. She quickly did what she needed to do and washed her hands, avoiding prolonged eye contact with her reflection in the mirror. As she was drying her hands, another woman entered, a harried-looking mother with a young child in tow. The woman struggled to manage her bags while keeping her energetic toddler from running off. Without thinking, Emily stepped forward to help, holding the door open and steadying a bag that was about to slip from the woman's grasp. "Thank you so much," the mother said gratefully. "It's like trying to herd cats sometimes." Emily laughed, the tension she'd been holding beginning to ease. "Happy to help. We've all been there, right?" As she exited the restroom, Emily felt a small surge of confidence. These normal, everyday interactions were becoming more frequent, each one a tiny affirmation of her place in the world. Stepping out into the crisp Chicago air, Emily hailed a taxi. As she settled into the back seat and gave the driver the address of her hotel, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate how far she'd come. Just a year ago, the idea of traveling alone as Emily would have seemed impossible, a distant dream too frightening to contemplate. The city skyline came into view, a forest of skyscrapers reaching towards the clouds. Emily felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. Tomorrow's job interview loomed large in her mind, full of potential and risk in equal measure. She knew that at some point she would need to have the conversation about her identity to navigate the delicate balance between professionalism and authenticity. As the taxi weaved through the bustling streets, Emily's thoughts drifted to the friends and family she'd left behind in Los Angeles. She thought of her parents, still struggling to understand her transition, but trying their best to be supportive. She remembered the look of confusion in her father's eyes the first time she'd worn a dress in front of him, and the way her mother had hugged her fiercely, whispering, "I just want you to be happy." She thought of her best friend, Mia, who had been her rock throughout the transition process. Mia had been there for every milestone, the first time Emily had worn makeup in public, her first doctor's appointment to discuss hormone therapy, the day she'd legally changed her name. Emily made a mental note to call Mia later, knowing her friend would be anxious to hear how the trip was going. The taxi pulled up in front of a modest hotel in downtown Chicago. Emily paid the driver and gathered her bags, taking in her surroundings. The street was alive with activity, business people hurrying to meetings, tourists consulting maps, street vendors hawking their wares. For a moment, Emily allowed herself to imagine blending seamlessly into this tapestry of urban life, just another woman going about her day. Inside the hotel, Emily approached the front desk with a mix of hope and apprehension. These interactions were always a test, a moment of truth where she would either be seen as she truly was or faced with the painful reminder of how the world had known her before. The receptionist, a cheerful young man with a neatly trimmed beard, looked up as she approached. "Good afternoon! Welcome to Chicago. Checking in?" Emily nodded, handing over her ID and credit card. She held her breath as the receptionist examined her driver's license, bracing herself for the all-too-familiar look of confusion or judgment. But the moment passed without incident. The receptionist processed her check-in efficiently, not batting an eye at the discrepancy between the name on the ID and the woman standing before him. "All right, Ms. Harrison, you're all set. You're in room 512. Elevators are just around the corner. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" The sound of Ms. Harrison sent a wave of warmth through Emily. "No, that's perfect. Thank you so much." As she made her way to her room, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The day had been a roller coaster of emotions, from the humiliation at LAX to the small victories and normal interactions that followed. Each step of the journey was a reminder of the complexities of living authentically in a world that wasn't always prepared to accept her. In the privacy of her hotel room, Emily finally allowed herself to fully relax. She unpacked her suitcase, carefully hanging up the outfit she'd chosen for tomorrow's interview, a smart blouse and pencil skirt that made her feel both professional and confident. She laid out her makeup and hair products on the bathroom counter, each item a tool in her daily ritual of self-expression and self-care. As the sun began to set outside her window, painting the Chicago skyline in hues of orange and pink, Emily sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out her phone. She dialed Mia's number, eager to share the events of the day with someone who truly understood. "Em, how was the flight? Did everything go okay?" Mia's concerned voice came through the speaker. Emily took a deep breath, recounting the security checkpoint ordeal and the moments of kindness and normalcy that followed. As she spoke, she felt the emotional weight of the day finally hit her, and tears began to well up in her eyes. "Oh, honey," Mia said softly. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, but I'm so proud of you for handling it with such grace. You're amazing, you know that?" Emily wiped her eyes, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. "Thanks, Mia. Sometimes I wonder if it will ever get easier, you know? If there will ever be a day when I can just exist without constantly having to explain or justify myself."
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!